I'm shouting all about love. Well, they cheated you like a dog, and you were the one who had made it so clear all those years ago. Talking all about how to give, they don't act with much honesty, but you put the way to the truth when you say all you need is love. Living with good or bad, I always looked up to you. Now when I cold
who worked with us on this and came up with a kind of a theme of tonight's program called Mill Days. Mill Days meaning life in a mill town, everything from life in the mill town, what it was like living here in the heyday of the mill, to what it was like actually working in the mill, and everything in between. We also are very fortunate to have TV3, the local access channel, here to cover this for those that couldn't make it. We're not quite sure when it's going to be on, but it'll either be as early as this weekend or sometime next week. Just watch Channel 3 and you'll see it. Because it's on Channel 3, you see the extra lights around here, and there are microphones, handheld microphones going around. Without sound, obviously you have the camera filming people's mouths moving, and we wanted to kind of record this and keep it, here at the museum, and if anybody actually wanted a copy later on, we can arrange that as well. We're also very happy that the NCCA and TV3, Mr. Massimilla, set this all up. The sound was courtesy of the NCCA with John Hedinger setting all the equipment up. This is a great sound system, and it should work well. And I think it should be a good show on Channel 3 as well. So to get this thing going, we were lucky to have Jay Bartlett, who obviously grew up here in town and pretty much knows everybody, and his father worked in a mill for many years, as our MC. And those of you that know Jay, and I think you all probably know Jay, know he's a tough guy to get along with, and a son of a gun to do something like this, but we talked him into it, and we're just going to jump right into it. The format is very casual. Think of him as Phil Donahue walking through the audience, and we want to keep it light and casual and have some fun with this as well, and I think that'll be what happens as we go along. So thank you. Jay?
Thanks, Joe. Can you hear me all right in the back? Okay. I'd like to thank you all for coming out on such a horrible night tonight. It wasn't the best of all nights. I'd like to thank these guys for inviting me here. It's quite an honor to be selected for this. Thank Quinny. He's got a good selection of notes for me here to ask questions, so I really don't have to do any thinking at all. So, but I was surprised that Father Bill didn't have that much trouble talking in front of a big crowd. The way he did his appointments, I thought he probably might be the Pope or something. But I usually start out, I try to get the feel of the crowd. I want to see what everybody's like, see how sharp they are. So I got like a little detective test today I want to go with you, just for a minute. I'm going to give you a few clues, and then you've got to tell me something at the end. Okay, there were these two old ladies, and they both loved baseball. So they went to a baseball game, but they also both liked to drink. So they snuck a bottle of whiskey into the game with them. Well, the game went on, and they were drinking, and they were drinking, and they were drinking. And after a while, they ran out of liquor. Okay, now knowing this, okay, what was the inning of the game, and what was going on in the game? What was the status of the game? I didn't really want to call them the bags are loaded, but I mean it. I'll tell you what, I think we'll start with some general questions here. Some general ones. Joe gave me some general ones. Quinny gave me some real pointed ones. Are these set up? Do you know a lot of the answers in this thing, on these questions? So I was talking with my uncle, and he said, boy, who would know that one about 1892? And I said, well, I don't know. I think Quinny knows the answer already. But some of the general ones, and I do want to mention, some of these seem very simple to a lot of you because they were straightforward. They were simple to me because, you know, it was just part of the mill. But we've got to remember that we do have a lot of people out there, okay, young people that don't really know that much about the mill, and I think this is wonderful. They're going to learn something about it. Like the other day, I was talking to a kid, and I asked him if he knew what a backtender was. He didn't know what it was. I asked him if he knew what a rewinder was, and he told me it was on top of his TV to rewind the tape. So there's a lot of stuff these kids don't know about the mill. So this is a good opportunity for them. So let me start with one. These guys both hit the same question here, so that's a good one to start with. In the early days, most everything in town was provided by the mill through the company-owned stores, clinics, and houses. Can you tell how that worked? Was it expensive? Did you have a choice? Did the company extend credit? I think, Quinny, you asked, did you have vouchers? I think, is that how you put it, too? Okay, is there anybody who would like to talk about that at all? I remember the company store myself. My father worked in it. But I just want to have somebody else do the talking. They'll bring a microphone right to you, okay? If you just sit right down, he'll bring it right to you, and then... Don't even have to leave your phone.
Yeah, my name's Lou Bossy. I used to work at the company store when I was a kid, and there's one other person in here that worked there. That was Libby. She ran the ladies' clothing department, I believe. Oh, yeah, Libby. Anyway, my first job in the company store was cleaning turkeys for the Christmas basket that the company used to give to all of its employees. And it was really a nice job. The turkeys came in with all their feathers on, their heads, their necks, and their legs, and we had to take the feathers off, pull the legs, and it was really an experience for me. I was probably about 10 years old when I was doing that. I also worked as a soda jerk, and I filled that role very well. But they used to have everything in this store that you could imagine. And every Sunday morning it was open for 4 hours to allow the people in town to come in and get their newspapers, their cigarettes, and their Alka-Seltzer. And they had everything in that store that you could think of. And one Sunday morning, that place was packed, and I was working with Tommy Dorn and Joe Perry, both of who are deceased at this time. And somebody came behind the counter and whispered something into Tommy Dorn's ear. And he starts looking around for Joe Perry. Joe's on the other side of the store, and he says, Joe, do we have...
I don't know, what is the rating of this show anyways, guys? Luckily, this is going to air next week, so we don't have to worry.
How times have changed.
Anyway,
I'm glad Father Bill left early, but they did have credit at the company store because they didn't pay anybody for working at the mill. They had these coupon books worth $10, and if you lived long enough, you could pay off your company store debt. That's all I have to say.
I just want to remind you, it's the Phil Donahue show, not the Rosie O'Donnell show. So before you start talking like that. Okay. Part of, I believe, Quinny's thing was this. Anybody else know anybody else that worked at the store about years ago? I don't know who. I was too small. I don't know who worked at it before my father. Anybody else here know? Now, didn't you have a brother that worked there or also?
Yeah, my brother Joe worked there, and Richard Bossy worked there. That's Louie's brother, and I worked there. I used to help Phil Saunders deliver groceries. He always took the little truck and drove around town, but I guess Phil used to do that in the old days by horse and buggy. He was there for, it seems, an eternity. He was quite a fellow.
That's not remembering these people, but I was cooking dinner last night. I opened the refrigerator up and I forgot what I was looking for.
That's okay. Why don't we stay in somewhat the same geographical area? If you're looking at the company... Oh, sorry, Sam. Go ahead. 1 second. She'll bring the mic right for you. The mics are not as much for you people to hear, for masses to pick this thing up properly so it'll go over the TV. We have to speak in the mic.
Am I right that the meat cutter's name used to be Jimmy McCaffrey? Yes. My mother took me down there, time and time again, and I'd get in the back, and he'd reach over and he'd grab me right around the neck. And he'd say, I'm going to put you in the cooler. I'm going to lock you up. And you know, the ice house was still out back at that time. And I suppose maybe the meat locker, that's what it was. You're going to put me in the meat locker. And I was scared to death of him. And my mother would just snicker. And he said, you want to grow up so people don't do this to you? Yeah. and I said, yeah. And he said, eat onion sandwiches. And I still eat onion sandwiches. Just on one piece of bread, lightly butter it, and on the other one, lightly mayonnaise, a lot of salt, a lot of pepper, onions, and nothing else. And it's just great. Jimmy McCaffrey did that for me.
Thanks a lot, Sam. You know, there's something I did forget, and I should say it because a lot of our younger viewers don't know this. They're probably wondering, where was the company store? Okay? So that the people that are younger that want to know where it is, if you're familiar with LaHoots, the main store of LaHoots on the main street of Lincoln, that was the company store. So I know you know where it is. You just didn't know what it was. Anything else about that company store? I remember it had downstairs, it had an upstairs, had quite a toy department because I was small back then.
In the basement of LaHoots, I happened to be down there one day. There, other than the board shop, there's a large walk-in brick and concrete safe. It's big enough to hold 3 or 4 people. I was wondering what that was for, whether that was the paymaster's safe. And then there's also a big area down there with some very thick walls and thick doors, maybe 8 inches thick. I was wondering, was that the meat locker you're talking about?
Yeah, that big room in back was the freezer where we used to store meat and turkeys.
The thing about those turkeys, you heard them. You hit right what I was going to go to next, the ice house, because we're in the same geographic area. Tell me if I'm wrong. The ice house was that, as you're looking at the company store, as what we call now LaHoots, wasn't the outhouse. The ice house to the left of the company store? Okay, could somebody tell us about the ice house, and also where did they get the ice from? Anybody know that? Oh, the Bossies here. They're on it tonight.
A lot of the ice come from Camp 7. They had a pond up there where they used to cut the ice and bring it down on the trains. And the mill pond, too. It had a little bit of bark in it, but it wasn't bad. We used to eat a lot of it.
Now you're not speaking of Black Pond, you're speaking of Ice Pond, right? The one they used to call Ice Pond up in the Lincoln Woods?
Yeah, back at Camp 7.
Right, right.
Yeah, that was an ice pond.
There's Black Pond and Ice Pond, isn't there? Well, I thought there was 2. No? That's what I mean, but there are 2 ponds up there, right?
Yes, Black
so
Pond.
I'm just saying, in case somebody goes up and gets to one of them.
No, they had a dam there where they dammed it up to make the water.
Right.
And they had an ice house up there, too.
Okay, Quindy went on a little bit more in one of his questions, and he said, did they ever get ice from Woodstock or North Woodstock?
Yes, and down in back where the Stan's Tire Barn is, there was an ice barn there and a pond in back there where they caught ice. And it had an ice house there, too.
All right, was that owned by the company also?
It's right in back where there's a trailer out back there right now, and back at Stan's Tire Barn, where he put right in back of there. There was an ice house with a pond there.
Right, but did Parker Young also own that too, that operation?
I don't know who owned it.
Okay, Roland says Gordon's, and other things said Mellett's might have done it. Okay.
And then next to that, of course, was the old hospital. And all these places were heated from the paper mill by steam pipes that came across the road and heated the store, the hospital, and the inn that was down the road. And they were all heated from the mill by steam pipes under the road.
When you say the inn, do you mean the Lincoln Hotel?
It's where the ball field is now.
Where the ball field is
Yeah,
now.
there was a big inn there. There used to be a boarding house at one time, and they used to have a lot of Canadians in there. And one half of it was turned to a boys' club, which I would belong to. And we used to have boxing when they used to be outside on the 4th of July, and we used to have tons of people that used to donate our money. And I boxed. They used to donate money and send a whole bunch of us 2 weeks to summer camp, Camp Huckins. And that's where we learned how to play pool and just about any sport you can. We built model airplanes, had everything there. And it was a nice place, a really nice place.
Now, when you speak of the hospital, this is pretty easy. They're going right on to the next question and the next question. I don't even have to ask it. When you speak of the hospital, is it still the same one that I'm thinking of, what we used to call the clinic? Was it different? Okay, it's the same one. Okay, I had to go there one time because I zipped my fly up too fast. I was pretty embarrassed, too.
What did you do? Get your lip?
Yes, Mr. Malevis.
Talking to this. This is a little story about the ice house up in Lincoln. It's not Black Pond, it's Ice Pond. And they used to pick up a crew and go up cut ice. And Louis Blanchard was the cook up there. One year I was up there. And sometimes they'd pick up a team, come down, play basketball, and go back up. But Dennis Kellum took me and Bobby McGee up as we were kids. And the way they worked it, they filled the ice house down in Lincoln, and then they'd fill the ice house up there by the ice pond. So Dennis says, oh, we had a nice catch of trout. Come on, we're up Black Pond, walk down to the ice house, clean the sawdust off, take a jackknife, chip the ice, put a trout in there, the big ones, and they were on ice till the next day. And we used to use that ice house that way, you know. And when the company down here was down low on ice, they send a train and a boxcar up and load the boxcar, bring it down to Lincoln. They never ran out ice.
Now, am I wrong? Somewhere in the back of my mind, I'm thinking I heard that the ice house burnt down. Did it burn down? Or was it torn down? And do you remember about what year that was? I never saw the ice house. I was born in 55, so I was wondering what year that was torn down.
It was quite early when everybody stopped using, when General Electric came out with the refrigerators, and they didn't use the ice as frequently. They used to go around peddling along with Gordon's ice. He was the ice delivery person down there in North Woodstock and in parts of Lincoln. And everyone had the ice chest on the porch outside. Didn't bring it inside because you'd have to change the water pan every now and then. Just throw it off the porch. Water the flowers at the same time.
Oh, okay. That's handy. Okay.
I do recall when we were children, we could go up there because there was an overhead where they passed the ice across from the car to Tom's, and the ice slid to the top, and as it got full, that was a great invitation for us kids to go in there and play. It was all padded with sawdust, every layer. And there was a fellow by the name of Leo Johnson. He was about the same age I was. And he had an Angora sweater, and we had a little candle way up in a big cupola. And we'd light that every now and then for light. And his Angora sweater caught fire. And unfortunately, he ran down. We couldn't catch him. He ran and slid off the roof and headed toward his home. And I think Wilford Bishop was there at the time, and he smothered him and put the fire out. And he ended up going to Boston, or down southern part of the state of Boston, for treatments to his neck that severely burned.
I'll say this wasn't a humorous story, this was a bad story.
This is a true story.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And
I want to know whether to laugh or not.
He was one of the nicest guys you could have as a friend back then, and he was a true gritty guy. He come out of there fine and dandy. He did participate in most of the baseball games and whatever. And I think you were the one, weren't you, Wilford, that finally smothered him at the bottom?
Thank goodness. Thank you, Wilford. What a happy ending.
We were in hot pursuit, but he happened to be right there. He lived right on the next house from them. And we all were grouped together anyway. We all played together. The only thing is, if you were from the South End, which I was, you had to get a lot of friends because you made may get into a fisticuff fight or something. That was part of growing up.
All right, going on now, we might as well move right on to another subject here. We had a couple of different parts of town. Before I forget, I was reminded, and I meant to say this before I started, and I forgot. Thank you for reminding me. Once again, our viewers won't know us all. So if we could, when you take the microphone, say who you are, say, hi, Jay Bartlett from Lincoln, or wherever you're from, and then just go on like that. That'd be real helpful for the audience that's watching us. Okay, growing up, I know there was a couple of parts of town, and my mother wouldn't let me go to Pig's Ear, because that's where Roland lived. And I was born and brought up in Dodgeville. Well, I'm about 100 yards from Dodgeville. So, yes, well, you can't say that yet. That's part of the question now. Okay, what was originally, this is how Quinny did the question, so I want to bring it right in that way. What was originally in Dodgeville? What kind of industry was in Dodgeville? And now, for you viewers that don't know where Dodgeville is, there's a great big building there called the Nordic Inn. Am I right? Nordic Inn? That's the one. I get all the condominiums mixed up, too. So where the Nordic Inn one was Dodge Place, okay? And it had another name, just like South End was Pig's Ear and Clothespin. And so that was, I believe, the industry was there. Anybody know anything about that clothespin factory? Could elaborate on that? I can tell you a funny story my grandmother told me. It's risque. All my stories are risque. And my grandmother, she has a very heavy French accent, and she talks like this, and she says, I worked at 13 in the clothespin factory. She says, none of the women liked me. None of them. And she says, and you know why? I said, no, I don't know why, my man. Yeah, and she goes, because I had a great big bust. She says, all the boys would look at me. She said, and the women, they hated me. You see? So, that's my grandmother's story. But anybody know was that torn down or did that burn down? And the other question we had, when I was growing up, there were big apartment buildings there. Was that part of the clothespin factory or were those built after? Anybody know that? What's that? Yeah, these were big apartment buildings, though. They were. Up in Clothespin? Yeah. So, anybody know what?
Three-story apartment.
Right.
Where the hardware store is now.
No, no. You're speaking of a different place. No, I'm still talking of Clothespin. You're speaking of where. We can talk about that too. We'll talk about that next. We'll segue right into that. Right. It's right on Main Street, right where the Nordic Inn is.
I'm Ruth Frank, by the way.
Yes.
I used to live in the house where Clothespin was. There were, I think it's 4 houses. It was right along there that the company put up. During the war, my husband was overseas. I lived there with the children. And those were, and funny story about that was they were rented for $45 a month. But because my husband was in the service and didn't work for the factory, for the mill, we had to pay an extra $5 per month.
They had you coming and going this mill.
I never told Lou Frank that.
Still go after him.
Keep it a secret.
Now, Ruth, when I was growing up, you'd get into Clothespin, you'd be walking down the road, and then there were like the 4 little houses down here, but there were big apartment buildings over here. Are you speaking of the big apartment ones over here or the 4 houses that are on the right? Yeah, the 4 houses. And then later on, the mill built some other ones on the end there where the TV guy was. Can't remember his name. What was that? Yeah, Mr. Young. Yeah, Alan Young. Yeah, he had the cool van. So, okay, so that was Clothespin. And now going down to the Beehive. And then we'll go down to the area of, I'm thinking, does anybody know where 2nd Street was? You know where 2nd Street? Beehive?
Clothespin again. There were also with United Shoe there had a small
mill there, what's called the United Shoe, and don't forget the penstock. That was pretty important there. We had that high.
We haven't forgot it. It's right in there.
Yeah, well, that's still in Colstrip.
Excuse me?
Yeah, that was still there, and I remember that froze up one time, and it fell over. The whole doggone thing fell over. It must have been about 50 feet high, you know.
Now, the one that fell over, though, was that made of wood? The second one was made of metal. Was the first one made of wood, penstock? There was a metal, it was a steel column still, the first and the second one? Okay, just the original penstock itself was wooden, the one that was on the ground. Remember we had the hoops on it? That was wooden. We're getting way ahead of ourselves here. We have a lot of penstock questions too. Okay, so we're whittling our way down. So for those people that don't know where the penstock was, and I'm assuming the original penstock was the same place as the second one. Is that right? They rebuilt it there. Where that would be is if you were at Gordy's restaurant and you worked in the kitchen and you walked out the kitchen and started heading towards the river, the penstock was right out about in that general area. Right to the right-hand side as you went to the dump. And that's a pretty important thing, too. I can't let that one go, because Charlie Lynch would never forget it. The dump... Okay, do you want to say something, Jeff?
Yeah. Well, anyways, up the Clothespin, you know, they had a baseball diamond and a boxing arena when I was a pretty little guy, and they held fights there, and Arthur Salem was the promoter. I think George McGee fought there. Of course, this kid, then they had a windstorm and blew the roof off, and that was kind of the end of that arena up there. But you probably remember the ball diamond at the Clothespin. The high school used to go up sometimes, practice there. So it was quite an athletic town at once, because if Grofton was playing baseball in Lincoln, it was a hard job to get up there. You had to get up there to get near the ball field, you know, because us kids, they used to pay us to shag baseballs over the bank. We'd get a quarter, and that was big money in them days.
You didn't bat it over the bank down by where the gun club was, did you? No.
Well, some of them went down that way.
Oh, okay. You want to say something about that, Wilfred? Or?
No, there was a red barn up there where the lumber people come down from the woods, and they keep their horses there all summer, and they bring them back in the fall.
Yes, I called my uncle today, Roland Tarter, and asked him the horse question that Queenie gave me. And there was a big barn, he said, down by the gun club. And then he told me where the other one is, and I have it written down here. If we ever get to the horse section, we'll find that out. So, okay, so now I guess we're doing clothespin. I guess that's a great area to be. The penstock. Let's wiggle our way down the street a bit here. Let me see. Let me get to the Lincoln question.
Yeah, there's remnants of that.
Yes, Joe Hewitt just said there's remnants of the old wooden penstock. You can see them by the bike path. So if you're astute and you want to look in the side, you can see there's big metal hoops, right? Big metal hoops. And when I was growing up, there were still pieces of wood in the thing, okay? And the dirt was still over them, and we'd actually run up through them in like little tunnels. But I'm sure that's all collapsed now, isn't it?
There's places where you can still see it, like little tunnels.
Still some little tunnels? Oh, anybody want to give Joe a mic?
Yeah, we used to choose sides when that old wooden penstock was done away with, and it was dark in there, except you get to where the hole was, and we'd have two gangs. One gang coming.
Put that right up to your mouth.
One gang coming from up by number 1 dam, one coming from the Clothespin, and we'd meet in there and wrestle. You didn't know who the heck you were tackling in there. It was scary.
We did the same thing with the metal one with girls, though. In fact, Joe Barrasso went up in that penstock many times with my sister. So anyway, I don't know what they did because it was pitch black. You were 1.5 miles in. The old metal one, you were 1.5 miles in there. I mean, 3/4 of a mile in, and it was scary. Yeah. So you had 3/4 of a mile to get out. So, Quinny's got a good one here. It says the 1910 census for Lincoln shows 2nd Street. The families on the street were John Lynch, Jack Boyle, Jimmy Woods, Michael, I don't have good eyesight at night, Bold, Henry Lake, Pat Doyle, Catherine Boyle, Tom Moore, James Doherty, Tommy Lassard, and Louis Boyle, etc. What happened to 2nd Street? Sounds like a play. I think we're all in agreement. That's Maple Street? Is that what you're thinking about? Maple Street. Okay. And anybody know where the Russian Club was? She says Pig's Ear. Somebody else told me something different today. The Russian Club. It's where the Russians went, yeah.
It was on Main Street. Main Street, near where the Chowder House is now.
Okay, could you say that a little louder in the microphone?
It was Betty Hyde, and it was on Main Street near where the Chowder shop is now, Chowder House. It was one of those buildings. We have a picture of it somewhere.
Okay, as someone described it to me, and see if you recollect it. They were saying that they thought it was the KSC building, or do you remember Durant's store, which was, what is that? What do they call it now? The King's Grant or something? The little restaurant there. Yeah, with the bowling alley. They said it also was turned into a bowling alley. Anybody know why it was called a Russian club? Was it a real club? But they had a club. Repeat yourself, please, Jean.
Yeah, we have a lot of pictures.
Who are you?
I'm... Excuse me, we're ruining his show, you know, over here. No, there are some lovely pictures down of the Russian Club and a lot of other stuff, too, that people ought to come in and see. And we could embellish your tape or whatever you're going to have from this. Thank you.
Oh, maybe we could put something together, a narrative, and show the different things. That'd be great. Moving down the street a little ways, getting to South End, as we like to call it. Could anybody tell us a little bit about growing up in South End? You want to speak a little bit about Roland? Anybody else here grew up in South End? Wilfred, you haven't spoke much. Why don't you tell us what you thought about South End?
South End?
Yes. Could you also explain for the kids where South End is?
Well, South End right now would be located down at right across from Rite Aid. In that particular area there, they had a couple of stores at Martell's, Gelitis, and the Diner. That was the South End, and right across the street was the Jungles. That's where the lumberjacks stayed during the summertime, and when they ran out of money, they'd start drinking canned heat and things like that there. But it's quite a organization, quite a little village, you might say. Now, we had one family down there by the name of Legacy, and one family by the name of Chase. And the kids would be playing on the street, and they'd have a argument or something. So eventually you'd see Mr. Legacy come walking out of the house. Then you see Mr. Chase walking out of the house, just like an old Western show. And they'd both walk down the street, and they'd have a big fight. And that was the entertainment we used to have.
Well, that answers that question. What was it like growing up in Lincoln? Yeah, it was neighborly.
Anyway, that area, well, they had all the Russian people and Polish people, everything down there. And we had Dovolocks down there. They had a nice farm or house. Well, they had a house with a garden with everything in it. And every fall they'd kill the pigs. We'd watch them kill the pigs and gut them and stuff like that there. And they had chickens and they grew grapes, and it was self-sufficient. But those people down there, it's quite a place to live in.
What do you think, Roland? What was South End like? Can I take a microphone here before you start? This is Roland Barassa.
To me, it was a great place to live. Nobody that I knew of had a padlock on their doors. My father couldn't afford a lock set, so the door was always open. Anyone could come in the house or whatever. And the best thing, we used to have punch boards that we'd take and sell chances on so we could get a football or a baseball bat and not use a cant dog to play in the field across from where Wilford was talking at Chase's place. And you could run from there all the way to the railroad station on top of lumber piles until Mr. Boyle would come out. That's Billy Boyle. He'd come out and try to catch us, but we could scoot down between the piles and get out of his way very quickly. You know, we were adept at that. And there was always something to do. There was kick the can, relievo. There was never any games that you lacked on doing. And you would like to go up to the boarding house with a punch board because you could sell them in 15 minutes. Most of the lumberjacks and people that worked in the mill would buy them. And then they finally allowed us to go into the mill itself and we could sell them on the machine things. And if you were lucky, you could get a job carrying a dinner pail at 5 o'clock. And you got maybe 25 cents a week to carry that dinner pail up, hot, you know. And I used to get Mr. Mike. He was Polish, I think, but such a nice family, you know. I'd get extra cookies and stuff just to carry it in. But what amazed me, you go in the mill and you could hang, all the dinner pails are hanging. I'd say, why are they all hanging like that? He says, well, to keep the roaches away and the silverfish. Okay, that's a good answer. I didn't know what they were, of course. And when you got to be 13 and 14, you could go to work summers in the paper mill. Not on any machine, but we washed windows the first year and went from one end of the mill to the other, washing windows until we got in between the two machine rooms, and there was heavy grease on the windows. So Mr. Temple, Joe Temple, he was a foreman, and we questioned him. We had only thing to wash him with was Bon Aimé soap and that felts from the mill. We scrubbed them pretty hard. We couldn't get these clean, so we couldn't get any compliments from Mr. Temple, so we went to him and said, what do we do now? He says, if you can't wash them, break them. Okay. What a picnic that was until...
See through them anyway that way.
Until Danny Donovan come along. He was a... So we were immediately taken off that job. We put somewhere else because Danny had to replace all the windows or it got quite drafty in the fall. Then we got up into the boiler room and that was the same situation, you know. He had to do a lot of scrubbing, but there was always something going on, and many of us, we'd only get 35 cents an hour, I guess. Then during the war years, early 42, 3, we got to work nights, and that was something. But our marks had to be pretty spiffy in order to get a job working nights, and we'd unload these boxcars of clay and non-essentials, and of course we were roaming all over, looking things over.
How old were you when you were unloading boxcars?
Pardon?
How old were you when you were unloading boxcars?
About 15. There was a very critical shortage of help, and then we'd unload the pulp cars also. Many of us, we'd work all week. We'd get so much money, so my mother would be very strict, and I had to put all my money in the post office. That was a bank back then. So when I finally got old enough and had a lot of money, well, she wouldn't let me grab any of it, you know, kept it right there till I joined the service. So it was one of those deals where you had to have that escrow account in there. All of us did that. And it was one of the happy times. We'd unload cars at night, and then once in a while we'd get to escape. And we remember one day we were working in the chip-loft area, and we were pushing the chips away. I don't know whether it was Bill Henderson, or one of us anyway, and they said the mansion's on fire. So to me, that didn't mean nothing. I had to didn't punch out or nothing, headed right up there at Mansion Hill. So it was one thing after another. It was just great years in our lives, and work never hurt us at all.
So you're saying you can have fun without TV or microwaves?
Not much of them.
Yeah. Talking about the mansion, anybody here see the mansion fire other than Roland? Anybody else? Show of hands. How many here have actually been in the mansion before it burned? Anybody want to speak about that? Didn't they have some sort of clubs and stuff in the Henry Mansion, either Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, or something? Anybody want to speak about that? Oh, okay.
Oh, I didn't know who you were. Oh.
Oh, you're the one. You just have to speak.
I'm the one that has to start. We had Girl Scouts starting with Brownies and the Cooper family. Mrs. Cooper Maple, was it? She started Girl Scouting there, and my mother became very involved in scouting. And we had a lot of fun in Lincoln.
Could you, for the television viewers, tell us where, of course it's pretty simple, it's on Mansion Hill, but the location of where the mansion was and kind of like what it looked like inside?
Well, go up Mansion Hill, and I may be your memory isn't too good after a while, but I think it's up about past where Jeannie Hogan lives, up there on the, up above that quite a bit. I think the garage is still up there, but I'm not sure. But that was a sad tale, because it had the mansion had an organ in it, a full pipe organ, and it had an elevator, and we were allowed to go up there and live in the, we lived there in the servants' quarters when the houses were all taken over from after Parker Young Company. We had to have a place to live, and so we rented that for a while. I guess it was rented by my father, but I'm not sure.
Anybody else want to speak about the mansion a little bit, or we just move right along here a little bit? I know my mother said that was her first elevator she ever rode on. It was a huge thrill for the little girls to ride that elevator. The mill houses. Yes, Joe. Yes, Joe.
He insists I say something.
Okay, go right at it. You're a good speaker.
Wait till I played with the caretaker's daughter the night before the mansion burned. We used to go up.
Is this a confession?
Well, I have a few things I could confess, but my babysitter's here, I think. My babysitter never let me out, I guess. I wasn't allowed in the South End. I was told not to go to Pig's Ear. And so we would sneak down and look in the jungle, and I'd sneak back home. And my mother was the town nurse, and she wasn't very big, unlike her daughter, who I guess is a little bigger.
But you both wore glasses.
But anyways, she would say, you're not going to go down there now. They're in the jungle, and perhaps some of them are drinking. And so anyways, her being the nurse, most of the men in the jungle, and inebriated and all, would find their way up to School Street to see my mother, who was very kind, and it impressed me a great deal. I was probably 6 or 7 years old, but I would open the door at night when the pounding, and my father must have been in the cellar. I don't know where he was. But anyways, no matter how big, inebriated, unclean, they were very clean. They were the most well-behaved, intoxicated lumbermen in the world, and I'd like to say a word for them, because they were kind. There was not trouble. She was a very tiny woman. They'd walk in the house, with their problem. I'd be scared to death thinking, I got to go get Daddy. We have to. Never was there trouble with these men. This is where they, more or less, this is where they spent their leisure time. They, that and the boarding house, of course, which was good. But anyways, back to the mansion. I remember the day before it burned, we were, we used to sled down. And the names were Charles, Gertrude Charles. Does anybody remember the Charles? He was the caretaker. I'd have to mention Kenny Stewart's name. Anybody that has been around a while, Kenny had great humor. And way back then, when the mansion burned, he was, you know, much weller than he was in later years, and he would talk about that fire. So years later, when the Lincoln Hotel burned, I used to tell them that when I was home taking care of my parents that we didn't sleep well at night. And the night the Lincoln Hotel burned, he called me early at 6 in the morning and said, well? And I said, well what? 6 in the morning. Well, did you go to the, now you have to bear in mind, my bedroom window could look at the hotel burning. And I never knew it did burn. That's my 2 fire stories.
Thank you, Carol. Okay, yes, Wilfred.
Mention Chaperone Farm also.
Yes, we haven't got to that yet. I thought we were going to jump into that. When somebody said Charles, I thought they were going to start going about the Henry kids. We've made mention a couple of times of the jungle. Maybe someone should explain for our viewers also. I think somebody did very briefly. The jungle is approximately right where the Rite Aid was, I guess, in that wooded area there. And when the lumberjacks had their money and they weren't cutting wood, they would come and they would camp out there and they would sometimes maybe drink. So, talking about the lumberjacks. Okay, we'll get back into town parts, but we'll just stay with lumberjacks right now. Anybody know where most of them came from, or the different places where they did come from? And did they cut wood in the summertime, or was that a period when they didn't cut as often? And what did they do in the summer if they didn't? Anybody want to speak on that? Okay, the camps, you're saying that the camps didn't start up until the wintertime? Okay, why don't you speak, Wilfred?
Until the fall, when the fall came, then they'd migrate back up country. They'd ride them back up in the trains.
And where did most of the lumberjacks come from? I know they're all over. Go ahead, Mr. Gilman.
I can remember, I wasn't very old, but I remember one time that Sherm Adams sent my father to Boston to recruit workers for the mill. Bring them back drunk or sober. We'll put them to work.
I've been told the same story. Not cutting down Sherm Adams, I'm just saying. He was a good personnel director. So, go ahead, Louis.
There were 24 lumber camps up in the Lincoln Woods, and that train used to go up there, and that's what the ski trail is right now, the cross-country ski trail. And we used to go up there and stay in those lumber camps to go fishing in the summertime. And these guys were out of those lumber camps at daybreak and back after dark. They worked 7 days a week. And when they weren't working, they'd give them a few days or weeks off, and they'd work 3 months up there. And they had a good reason to get drunk when they came to town. They needed to relax. They worked very hard, and they didn't have chainsaws. They had cross-cut saws and axes. But we did go fishing up there, and I did think they were open in the summertime because I didn't go fishing up there in the wintertime. But I did stay at Camp 24 and Camp 16, and they were like hotels with a big dining room.
Now, my mother and father speak of riding up on the train. Actually, I think my father and mother was on payroll or something. They'd bring the payroll up. But they also used to have people that would take trips up in the woods on the train to go see these lumber camps. Blueberrying, you say? How many people here, was one of the questions they had, how many people here have actually gone up to the lumber camps on the train? Oh, we still got a bunch here. That's great. That's great. So you say you would blueberry, or is there any other reason to go up there? Or, Joe, you want to talk about that at all?
Okay. I have a blueberry box home. It was given me by Lenny Mayhew and, well, Quint's grandmother and my mother. They used to set the train up on flat cars for people to sit on, and they'd run excursions up on Sunday to pick blueberries. And I have a blueberry homemade box you put on your, like a pack, and it's got the blueberry stains right in it. It belonged to Hawkshaw Mayhew's father. So that goes back a ways.
Right. Yeah, that's my mother talks about that. She said they set you right up on the flat car and you rode up.
Then, like coming from the lumberjacks, there was a guy, Escaline. He was a Swede. A young fella came to this country, and then he went into the service, and so he thought he'd go back to Sweden after he come out of the service. And he went over to Sweden, and he was broke, so he had to work to earn his way back to the States. And he says he'd be in the fields working, and they'd all point at him, well, he's American. He don't understand it, but he sure could. He never forget the lingo, because Georgie Strickland told me he always get a little Swedish paper sent to him all the time from over in that country, you know. But these people thought he couldn't speak English. He knew every word they were saying about him. He finally earned enough to come back to the United States.
That's a good ending. Let's see. Going on, we just mentioned something about the trains and everything. The trains that were down at the mill that used to go up there. Does anybody remember where they used to dump their ashes? Oh, okay. Here comes a good story.
It was right down in back where the police station is now. There was a track, and there was a big pit. They would drive over that, and they could dump their firebox in there. And one time it rained and filled it up, and us kids were playing down there, and I was walking along just as nice, and all of a sudden I disappeared. I went right in over my head in those ashes. But they used to, when they sent a train up in the woods, they had it's like a boxcar. They used to run in the tracks behind it probably a half an hour and check for fires. They always did that.
Now, when that pit got full, what did they do with the ashes then?
What's that?
What would they do with those ashes after that pit got full?
Yeah, they built roads. Half the roads in town were built with them.
Yeah. Was there another dumping spot?
That's the only one I ever knew of.
Yeah, I think there's one other one. See. Right, down behind the mill, if you go down behind P&C now, down in that area, there was another pit down in there.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay? Quick. By the way, this is the person for the television. This is the guy that came up with these questions, by the way, so if you don't like the questions.
The road from the clothespin going up to Gravity Dam, that was always coated thickly with old coal ashes. And I think everybody's driveways in town were filled with coal ashes.
I know my house that I'm in now has the cinders, and also has it underneath. But we got about 2 inches of loam, and the rest is cinders. The front yard, that's pretty common. And okay, talking about the Lincoln Town building there, what was that originally? Anybody want to talk about that? Anybody know anything about the garage? Anybody been in the garage? I'm sure some of you have been in that garage. What was the garage? Anybody new? Anybody different? Okay, Wilfred, go ahead.
At that time, my father had a large pulp truck, and he had to have it repaired. So they told him to drive it into the garage, so he drove it into the garage, and next thing you know, it was downstairs.
Anybody follow up on that one? Okay, let's start. Okay, Roland, go ahead.
There was always a gentleman standing out front, chewed tobacco, and you had to be clear of him. It was Mr. Barnhart, Bill Barnhart. He had more money than Carter had liver pills, so we thought anyway, because he's always handing us money. We thought that was great.
Okay, did the mill, when Parker Young ran the mill, did they own their own pulp trucks? Did they have their own trucks? Anybody want to speak about that? I did get some information on that one from one of their old truck drivers. So, but do you want to talk about that, Larry, a bit?
Well, I know a little bit about it. I know they used to get someone to take on trucks, sort of like a lease, and several of them had several trucks. Like, John Aldrich had 3 trucks, I think, but they was all company trucks. And they got paid so much to actually come right down to it. They were paying the company for the trucks, for the use of the trucks. And there wasn't a new dollar for an old one, which I found out afterwards when I tried hauling pulp myself. My father had warned me. He said there isn't a new dollar for an old one, but I had to try it.
Do you want to speak?
He had its own trucks. It had 2 cracker boxes and a tractor trailer.
Right, right.
Bud Holbrook and Roland Tatter.
Right, I had some names here. They had, let me see, Louis Emerson used to drive, Chet Woodbury. These are from my uncle, Roland Tarter, who was a truck driver for years for Parker Young, and then went on to, who was it that owned it? Brown, but kept it under the Parker Young name. And then it went to Fulton, then the Hemingway, and my uncle drove for all of them. So he said the first truck drivers were Louis Emerson, Chet Woodbury, Henry Paul, and of course it was Roland Tardiff, Adrian Tardiff, Armand Tardiff, Bud Holbrook, Johnny Wasco. Johnny drive? Johnny drove, right. Yeah, Johnny's in there. Yep, Bert Albee, got him down here too. Yep. And wait, is Bertie the same as Whitey? Yeah, Whitey Albee drove there. Okay, Bert drove too. Okay. Yeah, well, those are some of the guys right there that used to drive. And they used to service the trucks there. And they also told me that used to be a Ford dealership. Because the guy that used to run the thing also, I don't know if it was the same fellow you were talking about, had money coming out of his wallet. But they had some sort of Ford dealership too, or something or other out of there. So if anybody know any more about that or want to say anything else about that, or anybody else do you want to talk about the Lincoln Garage at all, or? Well, do you remember, Roland, when it stopped being the Lincoln Garage and when it became just a regular town building?
I think, as I recall, there was a fire and it caught fire, and then it was totally destroyed. I don't think it ever came back fully to a Lincoln Garage, but they rebuilt the whole thing just as a repair. And that's when Louis Hamnet, Emerson, quite a few worked there as mechanics and whatever, and they did a lot of the work for the paper mill trucks and vehicles down there then. But it was never fully back to the general public that I know of.
No, we got a lot of points here, but one of the biggest parts of the town, of course, was the mill. So I want to do a little talking about the mill. How many people here have worked in the paper mill? Good number. Okay. Could anybody go on about what back in the 40s, for example, or something, what was the average amount of hours a worker would work? What kind of benefits was he given, to compare it to nowadays? Can anybody describe mill life back then? Anybody want to describe that? Was it a good life? Speak right to the mic, please.
My memory of the late 30s and early 40s before the Second World War started was that paper mill was not doing very much. And my father didn't work very often, and we didn't have much money. We never had a Christmas. And we lived on the $10 coupon books at the company store. And they owned everything in town and everybody in town.
Okay, so if you worked for the mill and you bought your groceries at the company store and you lived in their company housing, could you take any money out at the end of the week?
We didn't see much.
Go ahead. Why don't you give Mr. Corbell here? Sonny, why don't you talk right in the mic, please?
I worked 27 years in the paper mill, and when I first started, I believe I started at 46 or 47 cents an hour. I'm not sure. I can't remember for sure. But I'll tell you one thing that I learned. I walked out on Fridays to the payroll place, and I used to wonder how come the envelope that they got, the flap was up on it. So finally one day I said, how come mine's always closed and those flaps are all up? I said, no money in it. They owed the company money because they get coupon books. At that time you could get coupon books, and many, many people lived just on coupons. I'll tell you, that they'd buy these books, and they owed the company, so they never drew a cent, never drew an empty envelope every week. And I made up my mind, boy, there's never going to be a flap open on my envelope, and it never was either. I worked there 27 years and always collected her pay.
Nobody ever gave you a flap.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's kind of, that answers the question. So there were a lot of people at the end of the day, at the end of the week, didn't have anything and had to go without and stuff. We're kind of spoiled now, I think. What, was there somebody over here now? Speak.
There was one fellow who couldn't get any money from his wife to buy cigarettes. So he'd go in the company store, and I worked there then, and he'd buy 3 cartons, and he'd go out in the front steps, and he'd sell them for half that amount to anybody that wanted to buy them, and then he'd go down to McGee's and get some beer.
Yeah, that's true.
Poor guys that do both. Can we talk a little bit about the mill? Sonny, maybe you could talk a little bit about that. How many paper machines, when the mill was really up and running, how many machines were going at one time? 3. Number 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, we're doing this for these people here that don't know that. And could anybody describe the machines, like, you know, where did it start? Who was the head of the machine? You know, who was the back tender? What was the broke hustler? Could you just give the positions of what? And how long in the old days it took you to go from broke hustler to the head?
Each machine had 4 men. The machine tender worked the wet end, the back tender run the front end, the third hand helped the back tender, and the fourth hand helped him. Then they had a broke hustler that picked up the broken paper that was on the floor and put it in carts. So the machine tender was the head of the machine, but there was a night super or a day super that controlled all 3 of the machines. And the machines run around the clock.
And how long would that take you to go from a broke hustler in the old days to be the, say, the top?
Until somebody died.
Right. You stayed in your position for quite some time, right?
That was the way it worked.
Yeah. So there was a lot of murder back then. Yes, 1 second. She'll bring a microphone right down to you.
Since I work in the paper mill theater, I noticed in scrambling around the building that the two of the machines were located where the paper mill theater is now, and they must have been about 200 feet long. And going out the sides of the theater are slots in the walls. The slots aimed down, and there were belts, evidently, that went down through the walls from the machines. Maybe there were 5 or 6 sections of the machines and 5 or 6 belts to pulleys. And the pulleys were in like trenches, which were like moats around the castle, but they're on either side of the theater. They're maybe 10 feet deep, 10 feet wide. And there's a large steel drive shaft in the center of the pulleys that runs the length of the building. And at the back of the building, they stop. And the question I have is, what drove those shafts, that drove those giant machines? Was it a steam turbine, a steam engine, electric motor?
And maybe when you describe, whoever's going to describe this one, you also talk about the electric plant down in the mill also, please.
Steam turbine.
Explain the boiler, the steam turbine, and the electric plant.
The machines are run by steam turbines. You know, they had probably a 3-foot pipe came from the boiler room, and that's how they operated. They were steam driven with a turbine and corner drives and everything, and they could speed them up or slow them down. But it was steam driven.
All right, now what were they burning in the boilers? Were they burning wood or were they burning bunker C at that time in the boilers?
The boiler room, well, they'd have to watch a gauge in them by the machines because they'd call the boiler room right off. They'd get them fires going over there, keep them going, because the steam gauge was going down.
What was their fuel, Joe? What kind of fuel were they using at that time?
Coal.
Coal?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you ask the fireman? Who's working the boiler room here? Who's not fessing up? Why don't you give that to Roland? Roland, tell us about the boiler room. And then if anybody is working the digester room, I want to know that too.
Well, I guess I worked there about 20 years, and you had to work up channel, you know, upgrade to get to be a fireman. You started in the old section of the boiler room, which was wood fires. The waste from the wood room, sawmill, down at the mill down in Livermore Falls,
Yep.
and it all came up. And whatever couldn't be made into groundwood laps or ground up again in the off the heater room and made into laps and put into a tall structure on the other end of the mill by the finishing room was all burned, so nothing went to waste. There wasn't a thing. And the rubbish from the buildings around, like the company store, that all went there. And nothing got wasted. They were all made steam. And you had to work your way up, like I said, and be on your toes at all times, because it was kind of a hard-working job, and then you'd get chunks of coal that were frozen, and most of the coal cars came from a place in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where they dug it out of the water, bring it up here, and it's 10 below zero. So you had to put oil pans underneath at a certain point in order to heat the cars, and there would be black smoke rolling all over town from these, and all the ladies would be complaining. And when you blew tubes, what you call clean your tubes, all that soot went over to Lincoln.
You did that at night, didn't you?
Well, we had to do it 10 o'clock in the morning and 9 o'clock at night.
What kind of scrubbers did you have on your stack?
There was no scrubbers. There was nothing but black smoke coming out.
Does anybody remember where, when you were driving up Route 3 from Plymouth, when you could first know you're in town? What part of Route 3 did you know you were in Lincoln? When could you smell it? I know when I used to remember smelling it. Yeah. Almost always by the Green Bridge in North Woodstock, I knew I was home. Yeah, whatever. I could still smell it. Either we're home or in Gorham, one or the other. Talking about that, now there was also a power plant in the mill. Now, was that ever run by the boiler? Was that strictly water power? Can anybody talk about the... Okay, could you talk about that a little bit, Larry? Just tell a little bit about and where did the water come from?
Well, the water all came from the penstock, of course, and ran the generators, which was right next to the grinder room. And I can tell you about that grinder room, because that was my first job in the mill. Oh,
I'll tell you what, tell us briefly about that, and then tell us something about the digester. Okay, what the digester does. There's a lot of kids here that don't know anything about this mill.
Well, the groundwood was ground with stones. There was these grinders that had 3 pockets, and you had to keep putting a stick of wood, which was 2 foot in length, into the grinder pockets, and they would grind down. Now, this was used for newsprint and that sort of stuff. Now, the digesters cooked the chips that were made in the woodroom, and that was all the sulfite, and which made good sulfite bleached stock.
Was that the heavy clay paper? The sulfite end, was that the heavy clay that came out of there too?
Well, yeah, envelopes and writing paper and Mimeo and that sort of stuff. That was actually a separate mill. The digesters and the bleach plant and all that was the pulp mill, and then the paper machines was the paper mill. But they was all connected.
I remember them being referred to that. Could you go, he alluded to a little bit about the groundwood. And what is the significance of Livermore Falls, okay, in the ground mill? What is that? So people don't know what that is.
They were using the water power, which is free, and they had the same type of operation down there with the big, huge grinding stones. And they'd they had their own boiler room, and they'd make laps. And those laps would all come up to central storage, which a lot of us kids work. You'd pile it up what they call the groundwood shed. And the piles are so huge, you go right up to the top of the thing, and you look down, and man, there was just nothing but a steel floor down below where they run those little carts to take it up. They only proportion that out, that would last most of the summer. and then it was filled again during the winter months when there's plenty of water to run the grindstones and stuff. So that was basically what it was, a storage building off the finishing room.
Okay, so, but Livermore, they made the laps, which was shipped up by train to Lincoln to be made into paper later.
Right.
Right, they just supplied us with it.
It was just a surplus.
Tie there, yeah. Okay, well, very good, all righty. How many days per week would the average mill worker work? Was he a 5-day week? Was he a 6-day week? Or 7-day week? Yeah, but a regular mill worker never had a day off? No, what was the average guy must have, what, 1 day off a week, right? Yeah?
It all depended on the demand for paper. There was times when you could work 7 days a week, 16 hours a day. I had one time when I worked 3 weeks, 16 hours a day. And I was in the beater room at the time, and I was feeding beaters with a forklift, bales of stock. And I fell asleep on the fork truck, and they lifted me off and laid me on the bales, and they woke me up at 7 o'clock in the morning and said, I think you better go home and go to bed, not work 16 tonight.
You were beat.
I was beat.
At what point did they start paying overtime? Did they pay at 40 hours, 48 hours? 40 hours. And was Sunday double time? Double time. And was it triple time Sunday with a holiday, or was there ever any triple time? No triple time. Double time. Okay. Joe.
Yeah, I've always been curious what when you're just getting out of high school and going into the mill, what was the most sought after jobs for both males and females? What was the job you really wanted to get in the mill?
Mr. Henry's son. Anybody want to mention what they thought was a good job in the mill? What was a bad job? I know chipping ice on coal was a bad job. I know that.
The safest job was in the finishing room where most of the ladies work.
Oh, you're a good man. That was my next question. What's the finishing room? Can you talk about that a bit?
The finishing room is where the big rolls of paper used to go to get cut up and made into bundles of typing paper and pads. And I think most of the employees in there were female. And you didn't get your hands dirty in there, and you didn't get your arms cut off or crushed in the paper machines. And that did happen.
Okay, so the finishing room was a good place to be.
Yes.
Counting reams of paper.
Yeah. You haven't talked about where the water came from. You talked about the penstock, but nobody...
Oh, I was going to get to that. They keep saying, they said the penstock, of course, but people out there go, of course. Oh. Yes. Where did the penstock come from? And how many dams were there in Lincoln that you remember?
When I was a boy, there were 2 dams in Lincoln. Number 1 dam is where Loon Mountain is at the present time, and that's where the main penstock got its water, which drove everything in the mill. And they had a dam which was called Gravity, but that was gone when I was born. And then they had the what do you call it, the mill hole? The old hole. There was a dam there that provided the water for the mill pond down through a creek.
That's 3. Now, wasn't there another one by that cable car that used to cross the river there? Wasn't there another one there? Number 2 dam. Yeah, so that would have been what, 4 dams, at least?
But there was a mill pond there at that time also, which they floated the logs into the mill with.
And you can explain to everybody where the water for the mill pond came? Actually, some of the kids nowadays should know where that came from. That's still evident. Can you explain where the water for the mill pond came from?
Well, the kids all go swimming now. They call the old hole. there was a gate that they used to raise and lower to let the water come down through. And they had 2 or 3 flood dams down there where they used to put the pulp in it when it was full of water. And then they'd open the gates. When the water went out, the pulp would go out too. That's how they carried it down to the mill pond. There was 2 or 3 of them there. But that's where all the water went.
Right. It's right down. If you go behind, what is that? Lincoln Station, they call that? Lincoln Lodge. Like Lodge at Lincoln Station? That big lodge, which is right behind Gordy's Steakhouse. It sounds like an ad for Gordy's Steakhouse, but it's a great reference point. Yeah, where the dump was, but right behind the dump was the dam, okay? And at that dam, and there's still remnants of that also, what they call the old hole now. Like he said, there was a gate, and it sluiced underneath the road and went across. And it was really good fishing all the way over through the ponds, by the way, because the water was still very clean when it got to that point, and it was a nice little brook there. And that would go into the mill pond at that point. Okay, going back on the mill again. Okay, I want to say the bull gang. Anybody here ever work in the bull gang at the mill? Okay. Oh, Wilfred, why don't you explain the bull gang to us? Was this like a bunch of cowboys or something? Or?
No, it was just a bunch of young fellows that they hired to empty all their clay cars, 100-pound bags of clay. And Carol Parent's brother worked with us. We used to call him Buller, and a few other people. But any heavy work around the mill, they'd call the bull gang.
Did you work in that too, Larry? You got a picture of a cow gang, and they had girls on this crew too?
The historical. This is a picture that came to us, and I think it's Charlie, who rides his bike around town. I'm trying to think.
Belrose?
Yes, Alice Belrose was in that group, and we have a picture of her in the museum.
Okay, that's down in the museum, you say?
Yes.
The cow gang. Okay.
Yep.
All right. I don't know why Quinty wrote this one. I didn't even know about this one. It says, the mill electrical department did the wiring for the Lincoln rope tow. How could it have happened that the meter was bypassed so that the town never paid for the electricity? Anybody know how that happened? Anybody want to fess up to that? Roland, you helped build that place.
I'm not going to admit to that.
Nobody knows how that happened? I guess we just probably didn't happen. It's a rumor. Urban myths. Okay, why did the mill pond, we're right on the mill pond, why did the mill pond go from holding thousands of logs to having many individual pulp piles? Anyone want to talk on that? I don't know the answer. Do you want to talk? Joe, you got to...
I can tell something about the mill pond. We used to wait till it freeze over around Thanksgiving and go down for the rubber ice. So me and another chap, Kenny Horner, thought we'd go check the ice noontime, sliding on the ice, and we got out in a little channel. We both went in. So, oh boy, we'll get the afternoon off. We would go back to school. Old McCann will send us home. He sent us home, all right down to the boiler room and stand there. We couldn't get to go home. That was from the mill pond, of course.
Okay, Gil, you got anything you want to say about that?
They had the logging mill, so they had logs. They had a loader there. They used to unload the trucks and pile the logs all the way across the pond. And then when they started using pulp for the paper mill, then they brought the pulp in, and they had a conveyor off the pond that would take it inside the barker, which would bark the wood, and then go to the chipper and up into the...
What was the official name? I can't remember it, and the guy I was talking to today couldn't remember it. Those big towers that had the cables that you lifted the logs off. What were those towers called, those cranes? What were they called?
We used to call them the hoist.
The hoist.
Yeah, they'd take a whole load of logs all at once right off.
They were originally, let me see if I got this straight, I was told today, they were originally used for logs, like you say.
Yep.
And then they weren't used for years.
Long time.
Right. And then when they started bringing pulp in on trucks, somebody came up with the idea, we'll throw some 3x3s under your load and we'll run a cable through and we'll take the logs off.
And they started trucking it that way. Right. Every load of pulp would have a cable around it. And they had cranes down there that would lift them off and throw them on the pile. besides unloading the boxcars by hand also. They still had that too.
Didn't they also have those conveyors where the things went up to and then punched off the end too? Go ahead, Roland, you want to speak? One second.
When the cars would come down from Maine and everywhere else, they were generally unloaded there, and that was a means of stockpiling the wood. And there was, I always recall, there was Jimmy Saperchi and myself. We get stuck up there, and we weren't allowed to put a wind barrier, so it was mighty cold up there on the top of those piles. And it was snowy all the time, and the logs, and when they'd get too many, they'd shift over and go to another conveyor. Fred Sharon would come along with his crew, and they'd put another length up, so they kept going higher and higher and higher until we run out of room. Then they went up by the Legion and threw it all down over the bank, and that's when they used the water to bring it back down into the mill pond. But one time I was pulling the conveyor over, and talk about a man that was prone for an accident. I went to take my pulp hook and pull the conveyor over to shoot it to another direction. I landed down at the bottom, and it was bouncing down over there. If it hadn't been wintertime, I forgot, tough to get old, but I had two guys, they come over, Honky Martin and someone else. They said, that guy has to be dead. I landed in the big, deep snow. Thank God.
What did OSHA say about that?
I don't know.
OSHA. Okay. How late are we going till this evening, Joe? About 9? About 10 more minutes? Oh, okay. I don't want to stay too long. Yes.
It might be noted that getting back to the paper mill, they made some of the finest sulfite writing paper that was made. They really did, and envelope paper. I know I worked in the front, I worked in the shipping department for years there, and we did make a real good writing paper there, and envelope for years. In the end, they were making mostly envelope, you know.
I had heard that same thing. They had very high quality paper at one time. Anybody else want so they made newsprint, they made high quality paper. Was there any other kind that they made or anything? Did they ever make tissue or anything?
Well, I guess it's like a craft paper. Actually, it was, some of it was a cheaper box liner, like the corrugated inside of the corrugation inside of a box. That stuff in there, we made some of that. That was mostly with just junk that they made that out of, you know.
What's that? Writing paper. Yeah.
On the writing paper, you could hold it up to the light, and you could see Franconia.
I remember that little mark was right in every piece. Yep, watermark right there. In World War II, how did World War II affect the mill? I think somebody brought that up and everything about women. Were there a lot of women working in the mill, or more women than normal working in the mill? Anybody want to speak about what happened in World War II? Anybody? Okay, Gilly, give Gilly the... We have a lot of great questions here. I'm going to skip.
That's when a lot of the men were working a lot of overtime. They didn't have help, and that's when a lot of the Canadians came down here to work in the paper mill. That's where a lot of them come from at that time. That's why Lincoln had so many Canadians around.
So you say
the French people.
Prior to World War II, there weren't as many Canadians?
Yeah. Yeah, they were all bonded people here, because all the guys went in the service, and a lot of the women, they didn't have anybody to run the machines, and so they got help that way. That's how a lot of these foreigners come in here.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I want to hit on some of these other ones here. So, I'm going to try to wrap it up here, I guess, because we only got like about 5 more minutes. You guys have been real good about this and everything. And with these questions, I told somebody you could have about 3 nights worth of discussion here, so it's kind of fun to listen. But overall, okay, I could get a bunch of people's opinion here to wrap it up. Say, what would you say? Would you think the area was a good place to raise a family back then? Why? And how would you compare it as today? kids growing up? We have like a few people. Want to just tell what it was like and what you thought about it as far as raising a family and everything, and how would you compare it to today? Right, Carol.
I believe strongly in Hillary Clinton's book, It Takes a Village to Raise a Family. The village raised, is a very, very close-knit community, and everybody, the neighbors know where you were at all times, and everybody raised everybody's children. Wasn't funny. You didn't get away with anything.
One thing about in Lincoln, in the summer, you had a swimming pool, about 3 of them down in the river. Pretty everybody knew how to swim. And they built diving boards and everything, lugged the lumber from the mill. And it was, it was a good place to bring up family. There's nothing wrong with it. Plenty of fishing, good fishing, hike up into the Lincoln Woods,
You say you were happy growing up here?
Yeah.
Okay, Quinny, were you happy, Quinny?
Well, I know I had relatives living on about every street in town, so I sort of had to walk the straight and narrow, so maybe that's why we'd get orders to not go down to the mill pond, so instead we'd go hiking up in the woods. Didn't have relatives up there so much.
The mill pond heated, yes. I believe they put steam in the part by the drum debarker, didn't they, the mill pond? Yeah, because you would have to push the logs actually out of the pond into the debarker, right? All conveyors. I mean, you had to push. There were men on the pond actually pushing the logs to the conveyors. Yeah, was that a beginning, would that be considered a beginner's job? If you were a low man on totem pole, would you be a pole man? Or was that a kind of a medium job, or? Yeah, but I mean, it seems like you're having to stand on the pond on the water like that. It would seem like you wouldn't want to do that all day. Was that a desirable job or not a desirable job, or? Yeah.
He was a dynamite man. Bill Mayhew, I think he was a dynamite man, along with a couple others, and they had to charge the thing during the winter months, and that's a little dangerous, so you had to be quite careful. Sometimes a stick of pulp would land up on Main Street in Lincoln when they had too much underneath. That was kind of a dangerous job.
Yeah,
you were selected for that. You wanted that job.
Okay, I guess it wasn't low man on the totem pole. Anybody else want to talk about growing up here?
As I can remember growing up here, I thought this was a pretty nice place to live in. I mean, things have changed over the years. Years ago, I can remember bringing up my family. There were quite often family gathering of picnics and so forth, where the whole time up in the ball field, they'd go up there and have a clam bake or something like that. There was baseball games going on. Well, that's going on now too. But they had town teams and things like that. We had a lot of things going on, but there was a lot of workers then that were able to help on these things. And this is what I find today with all the new people that we got here in our town and so forth. They're up here to vacation. They're not up here to work. And so we don't have the people to work on committees and to do things like we used to have in gatherings. That's what I miss the most, probably. We had a great place we lived in around here. Everybody knew one another, and I thought it was pretty nice, I'll tell you.
Anybody else want to elaborate on that? You want to talk, Gene? Say something.
Very much, but I went away at the age of 14, I guess, and came back 50 some odd years later. But the town was lovely. It was a clean town and had all the sidewalks were all nice and cemented and whatever else. It was a very nice place to live, and we had our different ways of coming into town when we'd bring friends from school. By the farm, the Henry Farm was such a beautiful piece of property up there. And then you go by the mill, and it was a little different, and I didn't know whether to be proud of it or anything else because I didn't know anything about it. So, but it was a lovely town. We had a lot of good organizations in place and so on in town.
like to say something else. At one time, before the Kank was finished up here, and anybody that came into Lincoln had to come up this street here. This was 3A, and if you didn't know anybody here, you were lost. You were out of the way, because we were one close family in this town.
I remember all our recesses, there was pulp truck after pulp truck going by. Go ahead, Wilfred.
Back in the old days, they used to have a open-air trolley type thing that used to go to Plymouth every morning and come back in the afternoon.
This is on the train?
On the train. And I think, I like to see something like that revitalized again, because that was great.
I was just speaking down at a church gathering down in Campton last week, and the two old fellows there, gosh, I know the names too, and I can't think of the name right now. But anyways, he said the thing that he liked the best was at Livermore, they would just step on there and they would get on the train and go to Plymouth every day. And it would bring them to school, and they'd come back every day. And if they went shopping, my mother spoke of that too. She said that was very convenient. And they seemed to very much like that. You want to talk a little bit about the town?
Yeah, we had plenty of things to do here when we were kids. We had the boys' club. We had ice skating on the mill pond. They made an ice skating rink down at the boys' club every year. We had what is now the Kank Rec ski area. We had 3 lovely swimming holes. We had a theater, the Chaperone Theater. We had a very active high school sports program. There was all kinds of team opportunities available for children in this town. And if you didn't want to be in sports, there were plenty of jobs. So you didn't have time to get bored. And the winters were horrendous.
Used to be able to go to Plymouth for 50 cents on the train. And does anybody remember, though, when the original station was down by the, by the corner of where the town building parking lot is now?
You're saying the train station was down at the Lincoln Town Building down here?
Right down, if you went right down Church Street, it was right down by the corner of where the town building parking lot is now. The police station parking lot is.
Oh, okay. I always thought train station was down further a little ways, across from the mobile station.
There was a sidewalk that went down there, and Carpenter Smith had his carpenter shop and the pipe shop. Mr. Russell had a pipe shop, the plumber. It was all down off the police station parking lot to the right.
Hey, what did you think about growing up here? You like life here? Was it a good life?
Huh?
Did you enjoy life here growing up?
Sure. I had no choice. I had a mother.
Hey, when the flap's up, you got to go with it.
I had a mother and father said, "You will." Yes. And we didn't ask why. We just did. I was 14 years old before I got to walk down to the end of the porch on our house. Oh. Because my father had his barber shop in what is now was supposed to be the parlor, and he wouldn't let us go down by there because he was afraid if we ran or jumped or did any that he might cut somebody. And we'd have had our butts cut if we had.
Shaky barber, yeah. That sounds like that joke where the guy says he didn't know his name was Tom until he was 14. He always thought his name was Go Get Wood.
Anyway, one of the good things being in Lincoln, we used to go down to the Deer Park Hotel, play golf all day for $1. You couldn't beat that.
I can't beat it now.
No. And we caddied there during the Depression, and we made out good. Yeah, oh yeah. Well, Lincoln, we had to go to Deer Park.
Joe could probably answer. Who are the big rivalries that these towns had? Was it Woodsville, Ashland? Were there any big rivalries that you had when you played sports or anything like that?
So what were the big sports rivalries? Who were the big sports rivalries?
All of them. Ashland, Groveton, Plymouth.
Plymouth had football, and my old brother was playing, and they used to beat them, you know. And they said, "Oh, you're catching right after football," but they couldn't beat Lincoln anyways. Not in basketball. This was basketball. They had strong baseball, so back in them days. They got the plaques up there in the school to prove it.
No.
Look, they had a baseball team and all the players on it were boils.
They were what? Oh, they said they had a baseball team. The complete team was all boils. Which, Quinny, how many uncles you have? Was it 7? 7 uncles here? A lot. Yeah. Well, I know we could talk all night, but I know some of you have to go home, and we have to call an end. But I'd like to thank you all for coming out tonight, and I really want to thank you for your participation. It was very, very good. And I want to thank Joe and Quinny and everything for helping me with these questions and the opportunity to be here with you folks. So I'm going to turn it back over to Joe and just say I hope you have a good night.
Well, let's thank Jay for his help tonight. He did a great job. And thank you for coming out. Appreciate it.
Shouting all about love. Well, they treated you like a dog, and you were the one who had made it so clear all those years ago. Talking all about how to give. They don't act with much honesty, but you put the way to the truth when you say all you need is love. Someone, the devil's best friend, someone who offended all, we're living in a bad dream.
This is a book review. Hello, my name is Kate McCrowan. The title of my book is Vacation Under the Volcano by Mary Pope Osborne. The characters in this book were Jack and Annie. The setting is in Pompeii. A few important things that happened in the story were: who wants to vacation next to a volcano? Jack and Annie are about to find out when the magic treehouse whisks them back to the days of the Roman Empire. They arrive in Pompeii and soon discover that it is the very day the city will be destroyed. Now Jack and Annie must race against time to find an ancient library before it is buried in ash. Hello, my name is Catherine Hood. The title of my book is also Vacation on the Volcano by Mary Pope Osborne. The characters in this book were Jack and Annie. The setting is in Pompeii. A few important things that happened in the story were: a mountain exploded and became a volcano. There were gladiators. Their ink came from octopuses. They used a sundial to tell time. Pompeii was destroyed. It was covered with rock and lava. Mount Vesuvius erupted August 24th, AD 79.
Hello, my name is Sawyer Sellingham. My book is Vacation Under the Volcano by Mary Pope Osborne. The setting is in Pompeii. I forgot. The characters in this book are Jack and Annie. A few important things that happened in the story were: they had a vacation in Pompeii, August 24th, AD 79. The houses were called villas. The forum was the center of town. It took place about 2,000 years ago in Pompeii.
I hope you enjoyed this book as much as we did. You can find it at the school or local library.
This is a book review. The title, hello, my name is Taylor Watts. The title of my book is Viking Ships at Sunrise by Mary Pope Osborne. The characters in this book were Jack and Annie. The setting is in Ireland. A few important things that happened in the story were Jack and Annie are whisked back to ancient Ireland. They land on a cliff on a misty island. How will they find the story they are looking for? It will take Viking invasion, the help of a jolly monk, and a lot of courage for Jack and Annie to succeed.
Hello, my name is John Parker. The title of my book is Viking Ships at Sunrise by Mary Pope Osborne. The characters in this book were Jack and Annie. The setting is in Ireland. A few important things that happened in the story were it was about Vikings. The Vikings had warships. The word Viking means fighting men. The Vikings were settling men as well as fighting men. I think you will enjoy this book. I learned a lot. You can find this book at your local library or your school library.
I get up in the evening and I ain't got nothing to say. I come home in the morning, I go to bed.